Hi and welcome to Upsiders Information, and in today's video I will analyze this Halloween pre-election new moon on November 1st, and then I will make an election prediction after, but you can skip ahead if the election is your main concern, and the timestamps are below. But first, I want to address a comment about my previous video where someone thought I was being negative, and I want to say that I don't take this critique lightly, and that was actually the reason for my disclaimer, where I stated that I much rather be accurate than positive, for the same reason that there's a book of Revelation in the sacred scriptures, not to engage in fear porn, but to warn you, as to be aware is to be prepared. And like predictive programming, which creates self-fulfilled prophecies, I aim to assist the collective in the awakening. And it is fair to say that the current reality is not precisely positive, though the positive aspect is that there's an ulterior motive for it, which is of a spiritual nature, because we are in a spiritual war. That being said, today's disclaimer is that my objective prediction is not the same as my subjective opinion, hence what I think versus what I see. For the record, I'm officially an independent and I subscribe to the Hegelian dialectic and delusion of choosing, aka both wings belong to the same bird, and both parties being compromised, though not to the same degree. But let's first analyze the energy of the full moon to address the collective energy going into this election season. New moons are new beginnings and how appropriate for election times. This new moon is a 9-degree Scorpio, and Scorpio is the sign of intuition. But the moon is at fall in Scorpio because emotions run deep. And Scorpio is ruled by Mars and Pluto. Mars is the planet of bravery and courage, but also war, rage, and fear is the fight or flight response. Anywhere from the patriotic hero on the highest expression to a terrorist in the lowest expression. And Mars is at fall in Cancer, that is the sign of home and land. So this is a tired warrior protecting his territory. But the moon and Mars are in mutual reception since they rule each other's sign, so there's a collaboration mitigating the challenges. Now, both Mars and Pluto are in opposition, so there's a confrontation between the planet of aggression and the planet of transformation. Pluto represents the phoenix bird of death, rebirth, and transmutation. And transmutation is transformation plus mutation, so both growth and change. Is the planet of demolition, but also regeneration and rebuilding. Pluto is very intense, is deep, is obsessive, is extreme, and even explosive. It does rule power and wealth, as well as the shadows, and we can see a lot of skeletons coming out of the closets of the rich and famous, and it also rules nuclear energy. With its many uses, anywhere from energy production with the climate agenda to nukes, and we see these threats on the global stage. Now, Pluto is for the final time at the so-called anaretic or 29 last degree of Capricorn, the sign of the establishment. Now, the 29th critical degree is the maximal buildup of energy that can usher a critical mass, which is the minimum amount of energy required to exert a catalyst reaction of change, usually leading to a wave of awakening, which has triggered revolutions in the past. So this could show maximum tension between the people and the elites. And I was warning in my previous video about possible attacks, and not all attacks are with bombs. We just had an attack on our constitutional right to assembly. The DoD has authorized military to exert lethal force against Americans in case of uprisings. So it begs the question, what are they preparing for? Thankfully, we have a kite formation that takes us higher. A kite formation is made of two positive configurations, a grand sextile and a grand trine, which are both opportunities. The kite has Mars and Pluto at the axis, so conflict is to raise consciousness, and both planets are making harmonious aspects with Mercury, the planet of communication, and Neptune, the planet of spirituality. Mars is making the grand trine with these planets in water signs, so there can be a little bit heightened sensitivity, or actually literally manifest in more issues with water, as mentioned in my last month videos. And Pluto is in a positive grand sextile with the same planets, bringing revelations. There's another grand sextile involving Uranus, which is an opportunity to make social change, really. So these configurations are mitigating the challenges and bringing up contrast, like the humanitarian responses in case of emergencies, for example. So these are divine geometric alignments, and this portrays organization and coordination behind the scene. And as above, so below. And we have the two benefics at odds with each other. Venus, the planet of harmony and diplomacy, is opposing and confronting Jupiter, the planet that magnifies the situation. And Jupiter is both retrograde and in detriment in Gemini, the sign of the trine, so the two minds, magnifying the split in the collective, so there's volatility in the air. Gemini is an air sign. But the benefics make a positive aspect with Chiron, the wounded healer, and this brings a chance to heal the collective wound and hopefully this narrative of victimhood. And Mercury is opposed Uranus in Taurus. Uranus is the planet of shock and upheaval and expect the unexpected. So this brings up surprises and shocking news about an event or someone, likely in politics or in the world stage. And Uranus rules electricity and tech. Is in Taurus, and the Taurus-Scorpio axis is the financial axis. So shocking news about the economy or disruptions maybe on our grid that might reflect on the economy, or both, like outage interrupting transactions or even the election counting. And these people here are planning a large-scale cybersecurity exercise around election time for the Homeland Security Conference. Geez, what could go wrong? And Saturn, the planet of structures and limitations and law and order, is harmonizing with the moon, providing some grounding to the volatility, though is in a 10 square with Venus, so restrictions trump diplomacy, no pun intended. And Saturn is retrograde, and we had that in the 2000 election for reference. Now, it's noteworthy that the ruler of the times is Neptune, because it's the only planet that is in rulership, and is the foggy planet of spirituality, but also confusion, illusion, delusion, and deception. So it's imperative that we turn on to our spirituality to express the highest vibration of such continuum, as we're confronted with the lowest manifestation of the spectrum, that being not knowing what's really going on, though some can see through the fog. Now, let's analyze the country's chart on election day. Now, there's two ways of analyzing this chart. First, if we analyze this chart with the first house representing the incumbent and the seventh opposed house, the opposition, the incumbent is in Sagittarius and therefore ruled by Jupiter, and the opposition is in Gemini and ruled by Mercury. It's interesting that both rulers are swapped in each other's placements. Both Mercury and Jupiter are afflicted, as Mercury is in detriment in Sagittarius and Jupiter is in detriment in Gemini and retrograde too. So both parties are affected. Yet both parties have a benefic in their house, so they both might believe they won. Venus is the lesser benefic and female planet in the first house of the incumbent, and Jupiter is the greater benefic and masculine planet of wealth in the house of the opposition. How appropriate. Now the moon, which represents the population, starts at the first house of the incumbent, looking like it benefits her, but then in the middle of the day moves into the second house, and this points to the fact that people are more concerned with the economy. So far it looks kind of balanced. A second opinion on the reading of this chart is to consider the incumbent in the 10th house of career and the opposition in the opposed 4th house. In this case, we have exactly the same scenario, but backwards. The 10th house is Virgo and also ruled by Mercury, and the 4th house is Pisces and also ruled traditionally by Jupiter. So the same rulers, but the other way around. So this looks like the butterfly effect, that however we go about it, the result is the same, pointing to a fated event. Here, the 10th house of the incumbent is visited by trans-Pluto, the result point of the outer planets, which are all retrograde. And this would represent intense challenges. And in the 4th house of the opposition, we have the part of fortune, bringing support. But we also have Saturn, which represents limitation by the establishment, and Neptune, going anywhere from faith to deception. And there are already accounts of some glitches in the system in early voting states. Now, so far this would benefit more the opposition. But in either case, the moon, which is the people's mood, opposes the US stellium of planets in Cancer. So no one feels good about this election. And Mercury is in a tense quincunx with the benefics, bringing misunderstandings and miscommunications and even false information. And Pluto, opposed the US Mercury, brings challenging news too. Now, the south node of endings conjuncts the USMC, and this threatens our democracy. Now, the Sun conjuncts the MC, and Black Moon Lilith, representing darkness, conjuncts Juno, the asteroid of contracts and deals, in the 12th house of the hidden hand, pointing out to possible shenanigans. And Jupiter is hitting the US Mars, which magnifies confrontation and violence. Now, transiting Chiron hits the US Chiron in Aries, and this is another indication of wounds and conflict. And the dispositor is Mars, which is aggression. And it enters Leo, which is courage, and is conjunct in orb on the US North Node, another confirmation for possible violence. But let's see the candidate's chart on election and inauguration day. One forecasting technique is that transiting Saturn should be above the candidate's horizon and closer to the midheaven to stand a bigger chance. In the case of the incumbent, Saturn is on the 10th house of career and 10 degrees of the midheaven. In the case of the opposition, Saturn is above his horizon, though not close to the midheaven, so this would benefit her. But the other indicator states that the candidate with planets or angles that match the position of Jupiter and Saturn on election and inauguration day is more likely to win. In the case of the incumbent, on election day, Saturn is in the angular 10th house where she has her Chiron. Though, this is a harsh combo because the planet of restriction is on her wound. And Neptune brings a lot of confusion too, though she has Fortuna helping her. Now, Jupiter is in the 12th house where she has her Jupiter. But this is a Caton house, and this is harsh too, as the 12th house is the place of loss. And Jupiter magnifies that. And she also has Uranus, the planet of shock, conjunct Algol, the Medusa star of losing the head. So she might get shocked for not getting the popular vote. In the case of the opposition, transiting Saturn with Fortuna is in the angular 7th house of partnerships, though he doesn't have planets there. And Jupiter is in the angular 10th house of career and conjunct his north node of fate exact, and his Sun and Uranus in orb too, though transiting Uranus hit his Algol, bringing danger as well. Now let's see what happens by inauguration day, because things might change. By inauguration day, the incumbent has a stellium of planets in the 10th house of career with Venus, the asteroid America, and the North Node favoring her, though they are all in Pisces, that is the sign of beliefs over facts. And by inauguration day, the opposition has transiting Saturn conjunct Venus, so this would benefit him in the house of partnership, but he's not out of trouble because Uranus will turn direct and conjunct the fixed star Algol of losing the head again, for the third time in springtime, hitting the point where he had the first assassination attempt, though that was triggered by Mars. But this Mars will go over his Saturn and then Pluto, so he's still risking his life for the presidency. But Trump is an eclipse baby, so this is a special case. The way you destroy him is by not paying attention to him. But with Mars on his rising, the more you fight him, the more fuel to his fire. And with Mars conjunct with the asteroid America, he's fighting for his country. And in the 12th house of loss, he's willing to die for it, especially with Pluto there too. But if they kill him, they immortalize him. So that will backfire. Based on this, the opposition wins. And I could analyze the other charts, but without wasting your time, Vance has some commonalities with Trump's chart because they have the same ascendant and thus the houses. And we know Biden is out of the picture for the future, but his chart does not look good, and technically, he's still the president until Inauguration Day. So let's see what happens between Election Day and Inauguration Day. By the way, our founding fathers knew about astrology and they chose to sign the Declaration of Independence as well as they chose the election and inauguration times to be auspicious aspect for the US. Now, those times have changed throughout history and there's no guarantee that they won't change again. Now, the US just had its Pluto return, and they say that empires rise and fall within 250 years. And Pluto return is basically our Pluto birthday, which is 248 years. That is the pathway of Pluto around the sun, because it's the farthest planet and moves very slowly and changes sign every couple of decades, affecting generation. And now is doing so between election and inauguration day, which means we elect under one influence, the Capricorn influence, which is top down, and then we inaugurate under the Aquarian influence, which is down up. So between election and inauguration day, something happens. And Mercury will go retrograde at the end of November, flipping the script, another indication of change. And then we finish 2024 and start 2025 with the North Node, like our North Star, in 0-degree Aries, which is the beginning of the zodiac, like in the Draconic chart, which is a global reset. So whoever we elect in November might not make it to inauguration, which could prompt or increase any conflict. And then on inauguration day, Mars retrograde on the US Mercury retrograde can bring conflict over the narrative or the counting. And with the MC on the US Pluto in Capricorn in the second house of finances, brings up transformation in the economic system too. So the question is, if we're gonna have an election or if it is gonna be honored. Either way, it will be contested and delayed, with Mars going back and forth, and Chiron, Saturn, and Neptune changing directions. And in South America, we have a saying, let the siblings be united or devoured by the enemies. And that's why we have to work towards unity, which today seems mission impossible. Because with the United States no longer united and open borders, the ununited states are weakened and open to foreign enemies alike who could be waiting for an opportunity to exert an attack. And this is my conclusion, and I can see 4 to 5 possible scenarios. 1, we have election interference and the right rises and they call it an insurrection. 2, Trump wins and the left, BLM, and Antifa rises and we have riots and chaos on the street. So far we have seen similar scenarios. 3, Trump gets assassinated before or during election and the right rises, or after and he gets replaced by Vance and immortalized. 4, Trump wins, but the establishment doesn't allow him to become president based on political persecution under the guise of prosecution, and the right rises. 5, Biden gets replaced by Kamala before inauguration due to dementia, illness, or worse, making her the interim president and expediting her power. In either case, there's the possibility of upheaval, and some would argue a national divorce, civil unrest, or even martial law and suspension or delay of elections or inauguration. Now, if this gives you great trepidation, a friend of mine helped me see it under a different light. While these scenarios are scary, the alternative is this cultural Marxism and the elite's great-taking agenda. So despite the negative implications, the conflict might be overdue. Now, could you imagine France without the French Revolution, aka re-evolution? So, if this is fated, we can trust there's a bigger plan, as above, so below. And this is my personal opinion. We know Trump to be the anti-war candidate despite of comparisons with Hitler based partly on delivery and partly on projections because the Democrats stop being democratic unless you want to change your sex. So what happened to the I might not agree with you, but I'll defend your right to say it? And that's when I joined the walkaway and exit the party to become an independent. Now, Kamala looks good as per the narrative, not policies, but when did voting based on gender or race become non racist? She doesn't get assassination attempts because she doesn't threaten the establishment. And by establishment, I mean the permanent government that extends beyond elective officials, those that we cannot hire nor fire. And the presidents are really more selected than elected. And Kamala is an empty suit for the shadow government. She is what I call the ideal puppet in chief. Otherwise, why someone like Dick Cheney, who caused a genocide of 1 million deaths in Iraq over oil, would support her? That's not a good endorsement. And Trump, on the other hand, he's a wild card. He doesn't obey orders and therefore he threatens the continuation of the deep state. And that's his motto, drain the swamp. And there's a lot of money invested into convincing us that he's not good for us when he's not good for them. As he said, they're not after me, they're after you, I'm just in the way. And he threatens the WEF global agenda, the Great Reset, the Agenda 2030 of you will own nothing and eat crickets. And as Reagan said, there's no right or left as we think of it, but top down. So totalitarianism versus freedom. And coming from a country that we had a dirty war between both factions of the government, when one rises, the other meets them where they're at, and then conflict follows. And whoever wins, you have a boot on top. I don't want a left boot, I don't want a right boot. All I want is my constitutional right to freedom, and that's why so many of us come here. Not to import the problems we're escaping from. But if you don't go by the book or you change the book to import votes, however convenient might be for you, you destroy the country for everyone. And then there's nowhere else to go. Or do you know any other country in the world with open borders? And there's a reason for that. So when you go to that booth, be honest with yourself, ditch the narrative, and ask yourself, when were you better off? 4 years ago or in the last 4 years? With that, I will leave you today. Thank you very much for listening. Do not kill the messenger. And if you want a private reading, you know where to find me. The link is below. Please like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications not to miss out in upcoming predictions. Blessings, peace, namaste.